My name is Cleve Corner. I'm the manager of author and speaker engagement here at the Pratt Library. Thanks so much for coming out. Usually we host our programs at our central library, but we like to get into our 21 branches as much as possible. In my 4 years of doing this job, this is the first program I've been able to walk to from my home. So very happy to be here in our neighborhood branch, talking about our neighborhood. I've been living in this neighborhood for 15 years. I know some of you have been living here for a lot longer, but it's all relative, and it's interesting to watch and talk about how our neighborhood changes and how it looks now versus then. And China's going to get into a lot of that. But before we start, I want to thank my Pratt colleague, Teresa Duggan, who took all these photos over the last 10 to 20 years and is sharing them. So if you want to access this after the program, Teresa has a little QR code on a handout in the back. You can click on it and you can have access to her slideshow. Okay? China's going to read for about 35 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have time for your questions. If you have a question, raise your hand. I'm going to bring this mic over, and you may ask, why do we need a mic in this small space? And I will tell you it's because we're streaming this live on our Facebook and YouTube page, where it will also be archived. So we have an audience watching online. This way they can hear your question. If you ever can't make it out to a Pratt program, you can check out our Facebook and YouTube page and watch it there. So just an opportunity for us to connect with as many patrons as possible. Also want to just include that China has books for sale. They're in the back after the program. She'd be happy to sell one and happy to sign a copy for you. Okay? Without further ado, this afternoon, I'm happy to welcome China Martens to the Pratt Library to discuss her debut novel, The Avenue. A story about a single mother who works at an antique store in 2004 before the stock market crash, when the antique stores had just started popping up everywhere in the increasingly white-on-white gentrified Hampden. It's about wanting a world and living in this one. It's about a mango margarita and a record store guy. It's about value, matter, and objects changing hands. The Avenue is a raw, luminous debut novel that transforms the gritty everyday of working-class Baltimore into something transcendent. Following Mattie, a 38-year-old single mom navigating precarious employment, teenage chaos, and heartbreak on the Avenue, Martens crafts an unflinching portrait of survival that pulses with magic and beauty. This afternoon, as I mentioned earlier, China is joined by my Pratt Library colleague, Teresa Duggan, who has put together a slideshow of her photographs from over 20 years of living in Hampden. China Martens is a zinester extraordinaire, born in Baltimore. Her first book, The Future Generation, the zine book for subculture parents, kids, friends, and others, is a compilation of 16 years of her first zine that was reissued in March 2017. She is also the co-editor of Don't Leave Your Friends Behind, Concrete Support Families, Social Justice Movements, Social Justice Movement Communities, and Revolutionary Mothering, Love on the Front Lines, an anthology which centers mothers of color and marginalized mothers' voices, which Pulitzer Prize-winning author Alice Walker called juicy, gutsy, vulnerable, and brave. Author Amara Brooks calls The Avenue alive, pulsing, and primal, and fellow author Ariel Gore relays that the book is a brilliant, heartbreaking, and utterly authentic. The Avenue announces the arrival of a literary powerhouse. It's my great pleasure to welcome author and Hampdenite, China Martens.
Thank you. Thank you, Cleve. It's been such a delight. Thank you, John. Thank you, Teresa. The pictures that Teresa takes are often of small things in the Avenue around Hampden, and I often notice the same small things. So I love that. I'm going to take you into the world, a more internal world, into the antique store on the Avenue in 2004. So I'm going to read a chapter with the photos going to have that experience. We'll see how it goes. Seems really fun. And then after that, I'm going to just do like a little medley remix of the book to give you a taste. Oh, I forgot to thank you guys for coming. Thank you so much. It's so hard in today's world to have like real life experience. So thank you. For Eddie. This is just the start. Laurel could describe anything. In explaining how an Edward Wormley for Dunbar credenza was a very good piece and its price was never going to drop to a customer who didn't understand the value of designer and manufacturer, she said it had pedigree. Laurel was so persuasive with her own belief and smile. Her word selection was immaculate. She knew how to classify things, how to identify what something was and how much it was worth, although she never arrived at the figure instantly. She looked up items in her many books and she researched online, and she pulled from her own experiences with all her years dealing in antiques, conversations, searches from basements to auction houses, and she showed me how as well. She took a long time in the process. She was always tired. She was late for every appointment, complaining, a park-it ticket, a chipped nail, the line at the bank. She missed the gym. Every day was the worst day of her life. It took a while to put a price on something. Laurel was a tall brunette with a husky, deep voice, my age, but more of a grown-up. She wore high heels to work, and she was always color-coding her jewelry to match her outfit, which changed each day. She enjoyed taking smoking breaks, sitting out in front of the shop to talk. "What's this, Laurel? This small wood semicircle table?" I asked, pointing as I typed up the price tag. "What is that word? That word?" She paused to search her memory as it was on the tip of her tongue. "Demi-lune." "Yes, that's what that shape is called. It means half moon. It's made out of tiger oak." I'd been learning about different woods as we went along: flame maple, rosewood, walnut, teak, burl. The store had traditional antiques as well as the mid-century modern, a term that had been new to me, as well as many who came into our store. It meant the middle of the last century, the mid-1900s, which was becoming such a hot market for. Time was moving on, and everything from my childhood had become the kind of thing valued in antique stores. I was surprised to recognize the folding rope chair my parents had since I was small and growing up forever. Also to see some big, sticky Parisian street art paintings from the 60s, the cafeteria style of my 70s elementary school, but this kind of thing was sought after now. My grandmother had made fun of the open modern planning of my elementary school in the 70s. She said it made no sense. The modular colored Eames-era walls of the school she taught in the 80s I thought was dated and tacky. I didn't see a lot from my family's furniture in the clean lines of that era, for they considered it cold and were more the farmhouse, colonial, oak type, Victorian furniture. The kind my family had always valued and came to mind when thinking of antiques was now practically worthless. And Danish teak, which my aunt couldn't give away a few years back, was now what was in. Laurel taught me what to call things, how to look and what to look for in order to know what something is, to turn something over and look at the bottom of it first, to look at the bottom of a plate for a mark, or turn over a chair to see if it had a tag or a stamp. I never paid attention to that kind of thing before. I hadn't cared, to tell you the truth, one way or other, about what kind of furniture it was. I typed tiger oak, demi-lune, console tables, early 1800s. First comes the name, next comes the price. We would ask Mac. He kept everything in his head. He knew what he paid for it. Mac was quick to the point of recklessness, usually friendly and upbeat, never forgot a number, but misplaced his keys daily, and he knew his furniture. Well, really, they both did. They were both extremely knowledgeable, experienced, as well as fastidious and sloppy, but each in a different manner. My bosses bickered constantly. Everyone thought they were married, although they had never been married. They had been a couple when they started the business. They still lived together in the same house, but in different bedrooms for the last 6 years. Watch out. Oh my God, you're going to knock into that lamp, Mac, Laurel screamed as Mac strained to carry a piece of furniture by himself, waving any assistance away, not waiting for anyone to clear a path before he started up the steps. Jesus, Laurel. She had the kind of voice that could cause you to jump and drop something. I would soon learn that it's something she did almost any time someone carried something heavy and was straining to move it through a difficult path. They both had predictable patterns of driving momentum. Big Mac was the proverbial bull in the china shop, and scolding Laurel, so good at classification and decoration. However, a task could never be finished to her satisfaction, and so she rarely finished anything. With lots of shouting, it was the way things were done. Things sometimes broke, had broken before, would be broken again, but for the most part, the furniture made it intact. It's all right. The lamp wobbled. I caught it. It's a beautiful piece, isn't it? Mac said enthusiastically. Mac, also my age, but less of a grown-up than Laurel, had a certain classic style, a complicated family lineage, Turkish and Appalachian, with criminals and blue bloods on both sides, an everyman. Mac could fit in with the locals at the bar next door or the wealthy customers from Roland Park. A gentleman entered the store, and he came over to look at what the ruckus was all about, enjoying the informal feeling of our gathering. Then Mac started up, his charm, the hard sell, while Laurel interrupted with correcting him and pointing out imperfections, as well as going behind the counter to look for misplaced information, buzzing around and adding to the whole appeal of the item with a word here and there, that is, if she did not turn the clientele off with her abrasiveness. You can have it for $1,000, Mac said, dropping the price by a few $100s before there was any serious interest noted. Well, I need to think about that, said the newcomer. Mac replied with a good-natured smile, again, not selling so much as believing it himself. He said, you'd be crazy not to take it. Laurel's gonna kill me. Somehow, this method of sales often worked. Before I knew it, the potential customer and Mac were laughing confidentially about their personal problems, divorces, cars, gossiping with the intimacy of good friends. And I was cheered up. It was all a game here. It was all a bright, shiny, move the furniture around, play dollhouse arrangements, and redecoration every 2 minutes. The living room open to the street. I like this place. Mac and Laurel were so open about the fact they had so many faults that I could feel at home and not nervous about my own issues. There was no resume. I simply came back. And now Laurel was training me how to use the cash register. Completely trusting, needing help, they quickly started giving me passwords, security codes, the key to the building. They needed someone to take over as a manager, eventually, not just to dust, Laurel said. Yes, to dust, Mac said. So that's a chapter. And I'm gonna try to take you into this world with just words now. This chapter is called, You Know How Those Priests Are. I started recognizing some of the customers. On Friday, the minimalist man who bought a pair of French side tables on Tuesday told me that he placed them on each side of his bed, and now his robin egg blue bedroom looked exactly like a page in Architecture Digest. My daughter was being bad again. She stole $10 from Denise, and she went out to hang out with those new friends of hers. I didn't know what to do. I've learned to buy something right away if I want it or someone else will, said a nearby shopper. Sometimes I felt desire for an object as well. When I admired something, Laurel said, for the 4th time this week, save your money and you can get it. And I blurted out this time, no, you don't understand. I'll never be able to buy it or anything at all. That's not practical. Why? I have a teenage daughter. She'll be in college soon. I don't even have enough money to take care of our basic needs. Clamp and bondo. Have you ever heard of that expression? Mac said as he burst through the store with his hands full of rags and furniture stain. No, you can build a world with bondo. So I'm going to run over to the upholsterers, and there's a man coming to look at some china, a freaking pedophile. You know how those priests are. He's one of my teachers from Catholic school, so I'm glad I'm not going to be here. Yeah, come on a school trip to Europe and then take a bath with me, he says in a voice of another. Mac, just let it all out. Don't hold nothing back. Drop a bomb and run, why don't you? Laurel shrieked. The dishes are in the box over there behind the counter. See what pieces he wants and give me a call. I gotta go. Mac rushed out the door. Laurel checked her watch. I have engagement as well. I waited for the priest, for the pedophile. I felt a little scared, waiting for Mac's abuser. In he marched, big, stout, and ancient, with his black costume and his white collar, his luxurious snowy white hair, and his well-groomed mustache and beard. The whiskers around his nose and mouth were stained yellow. He must have been a heavy smoker. I knew him when he was a boy in school, said the priest, smiling. And when I pulled out the dishes, he was so happy. He talked to me easily. I didn't have to worry about feeling awkward, I realized. My job here, behind the counter, was just to listen. He told me of his mother. These were the dishes he ate off his whole life. Oh, mother. That's what he called her, his dear mother. But how could she? She gave away all the dishes to the maid when I left home. And he had loved that pattern. He had eaten off that pattern every day of his childhood. How he wished for them back. He was so vulnerable, the pedophile. The way he said mother, too. He wanted all the dishes in the box. He wanted more if we could find them. He was pleased. And he told me to tell Mac hello. Later, I found out the priest wasn't the one who fondled Mac. But I guess it was close enough in Mac's book. You know how those priests are. I crept through the alley. I crossed the street. I had a hard time walking by the record store every day. Focus on work, Mattie, I told myself. Home to work, work to home. The difference between my home and my workplace felt astounding. And as glad as I was to go home after work, I was often as relieved to come back to the antique shop. It was a simpler world at work, a nicer environment. Easier to clean, easier to know what to do. I noticed and I appreciated things I hadn't thought about before. Could you imagine living in such a perfectly designed environment, bought to reflect your style? I wasn't proud of the fact that I was bad at decorating, and it wasn't just about money. I know plenty of people who didn't have money, who still had the touch to make their home a beautiful environment. I once lived in a house painted and created with mostly recycled and found objects, manipulated into a perfect, creative environment. Planting flowers and arranging bottle caps can reflect the principle of order. But I just didn't have this knack. I had the anti-knack. Where will the poor live? Sunday morning, and Patsy Cline played in the antique store. Happy groups of family and friends browsed after brunch, looking for specific China patterns. I couldn't help but feel this melancholy I feared was endemic to my being. We are all going to hell, dancing out our last days on a pinhead, holding our breath in this calm yellow light before calamity. I didn't imagine the future, and I couldn't feel assured of anything. Will we make it? The Maryland Sun paper in front of me wondered in a headline. Faced with the struggle to call the place to call home. Kingsley Park, a federally subsidized housing complex, originally built to house a boomtown of World War II defense workers, had fallen in great disrepair and was being razed to the ground. A picture in the newspaper showed a girl with the same unusual name as my daughter looking out a ripped screen window, a rip in the screen that is very much like my own. The housing that was for the poor, the bottom rung of the ladder, is being demolished and was redeveloped for the moderately priced single-family homes the officials hope will attract young families and senior housing. It fell into disrepair, and so it must be demolished. Move the poor, 1,212 apartments. Kingsley Park was full of rodents climbing into infants' cribs, crumbling walls and drug dealers, full of old people trapped and poor people who were stuck. A location where the police spent up to 400 hours a week responding to calls for assistance and trying to catch drug dealers, where gunfire was heard in the street. When HUD took it over the complex and they turned it into subsidized housing, after originally fixing it up, they did not make any more repairs in the buildings since the 80s. Kingsley Park had become obsolete, and refurbishing with apartments the apartments would be too costly. And so they did not invest the profit back into the housing units. When the renovations stopped, the buildings deteriorated. Kingsley Park shared the fate of 3 other housing complexes in Baltimore that year. so dilapidated and crime-ridden that they had to be razed to the ground. A politician said, "I heard numerous complaints about the deplorable living conditions at Kingsley Park. Today, Essex is all about renaissance and revitalization. It's going to be a safe community again with affordable housing prices." A social worker said, "The low-income housing plan in Baltimore County seems to be a bulldozer." 300 families had to be relocated to a new Section 8 housing. Kingsley Park was great housing for its day. 50,000 wartime and airplane workers. 4 decades later, it was still working class in the 80s. Then when the complex was sold to the company under the HUD program, it was renovated, but the renovation stopped and the building deteriorated. With 6,000 people receiving housing vouchers in Baltimore County, the Great Housing Plan turned into a concentration of poverty, with 6,000 people receiving housing vouchers in Baltimore County and 10,000 people on the waiting list for 3 years. And you think it's a long wait to get into the Golden East Cafe for brunch. The newspaper said officials have not been aggressive enough with making housing options available to the poor. One of the last people to leave, a single mom who was having a hard time without transportation or a phone, said she hoped eventually to get back on her feet, maybe get a townhouse to start life again. I read the article and I wondered, where will the poor live? There is no property ownership for the poor in America. Certain groups of people are always moving other groups of people off their land. And what you own, well, there's always a scam to it. I didn't have the strength single-handedly to keep things together. To tell to my daughter who had dropped out of high school, was she watching too much daytime television? Or was she out too late drinking with the kids I didn't know, making messes she wouldn't clean up? Was she hopeful, happy, loving? I worried, but when it got to be too much to worry about, I just stopped. I tried to just love, to just keep on, to discipline myself enough to discipline her, to make sure the trash was taken out, the utensils washed and put away, to keep the house painted, the car serviced, the yard clear of debris. It was rather much. I realized I couldn't do it, not the way my neighbors seemed to, where each cat got a special amount of food at a special time and everything was done in the best way. If my cat had ear mites, then my cat had ear mites. I did a little bit here and there, and I tried not to stress out about it because stress is the worst. It will rob me of my life without subduing any of the things I was stressed out about. And I knew it wasn't just me, it was the world. We've all internalized that in our own way. The elections, the newspapers, the news broadcasts, the wars, things were wrong and they couldn't be made even halfway better, just a little better. And I tried to give up the spirit. I tried to keep up my spirit, but I was tired in the deepest way. So my best was to laugh and to enjoy the day, to feel things and to try to keep balance, to feel but not to despair. How we will make it through and how many days we had left, I couldn't think about that. I was a sloppy, sensual human. I was thoughtful. I was a complex that might need to be raised. So I'm just skipping along. We're skipping along the book towards the end, and then I'm going to go back to the beginning. This is from a chapter called Love and Commerce. When we entered the auction house, Mac introduced me to the doorman, Carmine, whispering in my ear first, "He has an art history degree. He used to be great with paintings." "This is her first auction." "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," Carmine said dryly. "You should have brought her someplace better." He explained that he'd been working here for the last 2 weeks straight. It felt like we were entering a neighborhood bar or a fish tank of piranhas, and I was the only thing fresh in the room. I eyed him up and down as he eyed me as well. Carmine reminded me of a man I once knew who was a doorman for a strip club on the block, and I don't know why, but I thought of something he told me once. If you want to know how to tell a street person from someone with money, look down. Always judge people by their shoes. Carmine had shiny shoes and he wore a black suit, like someone would for court, or the men who stand outside the funeral home next to the library on Falls Road. Bored, tired, slightly annoyed in suits. You can tell the men that have humor when it's been a long day. The moments that make each day worthwhile are always framed in such wide expanses of dullness and pain. And no matter what your job, death, or trying to prevent it, the day goes on just the same when it's your daily grind. Sorry. So I'm skipping ahead a little bit after the auction is over. At the end of the day, hours after the auction, in the loneliness of my evening, I stopped and I thought about it all. The trading of things at the auction, the folks in the stand selling crab cakes and cookies, working for tips and dollars, and the people in the street, the kids who tore off the open flag from the French antique store next to us, and they dragged it down the sidewalk, stepping on it like they were overthrowing aristocrats during the French Revolution, and then they stepped it in the gate of the pawn shop just a few stores past us. What can you say? There have always been the small-time punks and hoodlums, I thought. The kids have a right to it. Flags were meant to be dragged, even the flags of commerce of the hardworking small business owner. It's a tiny tax collected by the young. I thought about Laurel's new shade of lipstick she showed me, and how she said she hadn't had sex for 6 years. All work, all worry. The groups that gathered on the sidewalk for Sunday brunch, and the people who served them, the baristas and the bartenders, and the boredom and the tips and the laughter, just wanting to go home. And then when we're home, we want to get out of the house. Trading and distilling, rent and traffic, and all it takes to get back so little. This whole city, my whole life. And what did it mean to me? What did any of it mean? My service mistaken for friendship, the wood-carved house clothing, the frame to hold a bed, emotion saved for once and all, snatched out of the air and out of our hearts, vision shaped into form through the hands of artists, into concrete things. What do these objects in scrapbooks and objects on the wall mean? What did the buildings and the streets and the newspaper all mean? None of it meant anything to me, because if I had a choice, there was only one thing I wanted, one thing that meant anything to me. I was softness, crying out for softness, my naked skin on his naked skin, and nothing between us. Love was the only thing that didn't seem empty, like a joke, biding its time because it had to. Things to pay for, rise and shine for. Wouldn't you trade all this commerce for a kiss? Wouldn't you trade it for love? To curl up in bed and tell each other how you really felt? I couldn't be the only one who just felt stuck doing these pointless things, the only one who felt frustrated and alone in the middle of so much, unwanted and unwanting of anything besides my heart's desires. For all I cared, for all that felt true real, I thought, we're all just selling snowballs in the snow, selling our bodies and our minds, buying things with prices much too high. The music of silence. Silence is such experimental music. Silence is often unheard. My grandfather was 94 and had been hearing impaired for so long, living on his own in Florida, chasing after younger women, driving into things, until my father brought him up in this cold climate and took away his car keys and got him a hearing aid. It's hard for the old to accept a hearing aid. Their hearing slowly diminishes as they turn up the volume on their television sets and they start reading the lips of those around them. Expecting to not be able to make out every word, my grandfather stopped listening for individual words and he came to recognize sound patterns. The brain deteriorates in the spots needed for interpreting sound. And so with the sudden shock of hearing, the brain cannot catch back up. Hearing is a foreign country, leaving younger relatives viewing their hard of hearing grandparents as senile. But it's not so. They simply have lost many connections in their brain. Maybe they just can't remember how to say their children's names, much the way I remember a face but not the name of somebody that I meet. Something doesn't match up. The sounds of the world are terrifying. My grandfather told me that he couldn't stand to go outside with his hearing aid on because the wind would shriek around at an intolerable decibel. The sounds of his own chewing disgusted him. The sounds of the sheets crinkling kept him up at night. The doctor's advice was to suffer through the noise of hearing, jumping and cringing until one is desensitized. It's the only way, he said. After my grandfather told me this, I lay in bed, and I listened to the sounds of my sheets. I listened to the sounds of my breathing. I learned something from my almost deaf grandfather, who was glad he had lost his sense and not his sight like my almost blind grandmother. He said he was glad to see me. It had been 15 years since last we saw each other, and I wasn't paying attention then. Now I paid attention. I watched him flirt with my uncle's widowed mother, who had a stroke and was also hard of hearing. "You're a very nice lady," he told her. "What?" she said. "You should come up and visit the lake." "What?" he said. They smiled. She blushed. They took each other's hand. It's from Matter is Magic. My great-grandmother came to Baltimore from Germany when she was 9 years old, with a short delay due to the unexpected death of her mother. She was the oldest child, and she didn't go to school in this country, but she learned to cook and sew, and she took care of the household from that point on. I grew up hearing all of her stories, familiar with them as well as her accent and certain German words she still retained from all this time ago. She was the oldest person I knew. My sense of history, the mystery of how we come to be, which is something usually overlooked, but very close, that time will fly by, and you'll wake up the same person, still young inside, until you try to move out of the bed, and then you realize you're 84, is something I learned from her. She was my first babysitter, a seamstress. Oh, there's the clock. I was looking for the clock. This is from the first chapter, and this is the last part I'll read, selling snowballs in the snow. My friend once told me about an artist friend of hers who said, "It takes an object between people to establish any form of communication." And so when it snowed, he made snowballs, and he lined them up neatly in rows on a piece of cardboard for sale on the sidewalk, the way they do in New York City. I can picture these snowballs for sale, like how books and other items are, placed on the sidewalk, near clothes hanging on the fence in the makeshift markets that pop up in certain areas, which come and go over time. I visited New York a while ago. I went to London in the 80s. I lived in Germany for 4 years. My dad was working for the government. We moved there in 1974. So I was kind of like an army brat. My dad wrote manuals for soldiers on how to operate tanks safely. Then I came back to America in 1978 when I was 12. We moved every year and packed up our household into an unlimited number of boxes because the government paid for shipping. My mother thought it was best to take everything, everywhere, so at least we could have stability in that regard. Somehow, a box of my dolls did get lost in the last move when I was a teenager, and I lost my Dawn dolls. I bought another one as a young adult for a bit of markup at an antique street fair, although it was a 1960s style. It's not exactly antique, but it feels so good to have little Angie in my hands again, like I was a mole husband and she was my Thumbelina. There's such a familiarity to matter and form. It brings you back, sometimes years back. It triggers something in you. Yes, it helps you to remember, to be in the present, but to feel something from the past that didn't travel the same way as you did, not shedding cells like you are. It's good to be able to see and smell and hold something in your hands. Sometimes you need an object to travel between two states, to communicate from within yourself. And so this is the object. And I have a note to myself what to say. It says, "A little medley of selections from the Avenue. I hope that you read it and explore it for yourself." Thanks. And then we're going to answer questions.
Great. So if you have a
Teresa,
question for
too.
China, raise your hand. I'll bring the mic over to you.
And we got questions for Teresa
Yep.
also, or do you want to do
Teresa,
it?
any of the photographs?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Or anything you feel like talking about.
Just wondering during what time period you wrote this?
Oh, 2004. Yeah, I wanted to say that in the beginning because it's really important. And to think, it was a surprise to me in a way, thinking back how vintage 2004 was. Like my language was different, things I understood were different. We'd spent a lot of time online looking up objects, the value, or still had like reference books, reading the newspaper. It just wasn't, it still was like actually a very different world. And there was a lot of wars. And there still was a lot of like problems that we feel are very modern problems, but like we've still been like wrestling, I feel, wrestling with these same issues all my life.
I have a question from our audience watching online, and says, this is your first novel. How is it different writing this book from your nonfiction work?
Well, I'm very much a slice of life writer. But I always wanted to write novels my whole life. I just felt, I think because I became a mom at 21, and being a single mom, I didn't have the same amount of time to write larger works, so it was easier also just to write slice of life, or also I would write things to make a better world. And this novel was really different because it's not about making a better world. Like I would say, like the characters, there's a lot of things the characters do that aren't great. It was more just trying to be a slice of life, and it was my first. I wanted to do all my life, like write a novel, but it was very scary, and that like I hope with the second one, I'm going to be better. I hope that answers the question.
Antique stores changed much, or are they sort of the same style of the last 20
They
years?
really have changed because there was a little place. I mean, it's a couple months ago that I went on Falls Road, and it's a thrift store basement that you go on. It had this sign. It was like best deals ever, and I was talking to the guy in there. He was a young guy. He clear out storage spaces, and then they get stuff. And he had his phone. He would just put his phone to anything. And we had this big conversation because he said that this woman gave him this china that was very expensive. And I was trying to remember and ID it and looking for certain things. And he was like, no, you just go like this. But then I would see some of the things he pulled up, and I was like, yeah, but there's like fine lines. You know what I mean? Something can be in the style of, but it's not the exact thing. And so it was just such an interesting talk. I mean, I think it's the same as far as like the idea of value. A lot of people believe things that are expensive when they're not, and they will try to take it somewhere and sell it, and they're heartbroken. And also something very valuable can sit there for years until it finds the right person. So it still is this intricate, antiques are still this intricate web of knowing the right place to put the item from low to high. It doesn't matter. But of course, we have like Facebook Marketplace. I mean, back in the past, we had like Etsy, and not Etsy, but we had stuff online too. So I feel like that's not so much different. I mean, of course, in the book, a lot of what was considered fine antiques in the past weren't valuable, and I think that's even more true today. Like, there's a lot of things you just can't give away. But if you find something good that's beautiful, that has craftsmanship, I think it has value, even if in the moment somebody might not see the value. Is value, and I think we're going to miss that again. We're going to miss those things that we let slide by us.
Another question from our audience watching online. This is a craft question. Can you describe your regular writing day?
Oh man, I'm always striving. I love the idea of a practice, and I want to get back to it. Like this year, I've been obsessed with making mini quilts. So I haven't got like the practice, but I do like to write in the morning. My brain's fresh. And I'm always trying little tricks to discipline myself, because I write every day, notes I stick in my pocket, I write in my diary, I write, you're writing in your head, you think about things all the time, but it's really about like that practice to try to like cement it down, that you have to, there's a point of inspiration and like saving all those things, but then there's a point of like getting the pieces and putting it together in something. And so actually I'm excited to start writing more seriously in April, because I have another idea I've been working on for like 7 years. I always have like a long thing in the background that I want to write a memoir that also has like space aliens in it, because I like to defy the genre of whatever I'm doing, because I don't really understand genre all the way.
As someone who has like many collector people in my life, I feel like my girlfriend always kind of stops and drops everything when she sees like the free box on the side of the road. And we're obviously in a great city and neighborhood for that. What's like the item that when you see it, you kind of like stop everything to go check it out?
I love free boxes. So any free box, I would stop and look. And then I've kind of trained my daughter, like she feels the same way now. Like I don't think she did at a certain point, but now she legit feels that way too. Like we both give each other presents from the free box. Like the best thing that we can find for free is the most valuable thing. And we do have like incredible free boxes in Hampden and also like Charles Village. So yeah, when you say free boxes, like that's my love language. I think as a family of collectors too, like who has saved everything, and I think it started with being an immigrant, and like my great grandmother was a seamstress, just saving every tiny thing. For me, more it's about like saying no to things, being like, no, I don't have to bring this home just because it's a free chair. Like I used to have a free chair problem, and then I was like, somebody said on one and it broke and they fell down, they were so embarrassed, and I was like, don't do that again. So I feel like now I'm more like, no, yeah. Because I have like, I'm almost 60 and my house is full of like collection. Plus, if something is valuable to somebody else, I love it. Like I'll love their thing, I'll be like, this is their secret special thing, I have to keep it. So yeah, it's more about saying no, unless it's a free box.
I have another question here. How would you describe Hampden to someone who's never visited?
Wow, that's such a big topic. Like, before I moved here, a long time ago I used to live in Remington. And before I moved here, I lived by the airport, BWI, and they destroyed my neighborhood and they turned it into a parking lot. And I got relocation money if I bought a house. And I bought a house here, not planning to, but the house was like $55,000. It was the only affordable place. And when I came here, I had this dream. Now I'm just rambling. But when I came here, I had this dream that one day Hampden would be destroyed the same way my old neighborhood was. And I've lived here for 28 years, and it changes every single day that you walk out the street. It's still changing. And there's so much levels, and there's so much going on. Oh, I know why I told you that story. Because I wrote a story about my old neighborhood. And when I came here, I said, I never want to write a story about Hampden because it's too much for me. It's too big. Like, I would talk to the old man at the shoe repair store. I would talk to some people's stories, and I'm like, my God, there's so many stories here. I can't, like, that would, like, it would kill me as an author to try to be comprehensive with all the levels, you know, all the different things going on. I mean, how this place started as a town outside of the city, you know, and then the class and the race issues, and there's so many actually contrasts. I mean, maybe every place is like that, I'm not sure, but, so I think so probably the person visiting here, how I would describe it, it probably would be colored with like what I was thinking that month or something that had gone on the last week, you know, but it's pretty hard to explain everything, like Cafe Hun and the Pink Flamingos and the, like, and then like expensive eateries, like the whole arc of everything. Yeah, it's a lot.
I've lived in Baltimore all my life, and well, some years traveling. And my father was born on 38th Street near Roland, and I'm living on 38th Street now, so right there. And the Falcon Hans live across the street from me.
Ooh.
And but when me and my sisters, we grew up in Roland Park, and we used to come down here to go to the movies. And when we were teenagers, we would come down. And Hampden was so white that you couldn't come here if you were black unless you were working. And one of my sisters rented an apartment, and we were having a party, and we had somebody there that was black, and somebody at the bar across the street threw rocks in the window. So that's what makes me happy about Hampden now, is you walk down there and there's a Napstar hair braiding place that has people sit. I love walking by that and thinking, oh, this would drive those people crazy from the 70s. And they had that Redmond Hall, which was a Ku Klux Klan. I mean, there's a deep history of racism in Hampden, and I like to see it keep evolving and changing.
I mean, I would say, if I can just talk on that too, like the deep history of racism in Hampden is also like a deep history of racism in America, and no white people are free of that. And sometimes that's why it's nice to see like the intersection. I like to talk about the intersection between race and class, because I do feel like sometimes as a white on white, and not purely white, but gentrified place, it's as if that middle class whites aren't racist. And it's also like the history here, like the KKK was marching down the street. Same thing in East Baltimore when I first moved there. But like about the story of like the minister who got the KKK to stop marching. Like I've also known like low income, anti-racist, poor whites here too. And so like I feel like really needs to be addressed, but there's something, I feel like it becomes such a caricature when racism is such a big problem in America everywhere, to blame it only on Hampden. And also like when I lived in Remington, I never came to Hampden. And at that time, a lot of people who are white wouldn't come to Hampden either. It was very, and I do think it's a super interesting history of how like the mills and how the unions were busted and how work went down south, and like this very complicated history of like groups banding together and hating other groups, and like who does it benefit? The people with money always are the ones who are the benefit. What about Pennsylvania Avenue? A storied, beautiful place. How come this avenue is a shopping district and Pennsylvania isn't? I mean, that's something that I always say, like, this isn't the only avenue, you know? So it just, yeah, I always feel like really complicated about the race and class stuff, and like it isn't addressed as nuanced. It's not as easy just to be like, everything is in comparison to everything else. And yeah, I just feel like it's super nuanced, and there's always good and bad about the things. And that's like, and it is, even writing a book about the Avenue, like, cause I was thinking about, I was like, oh man, I need to like research and write an essay addressing this more, like what I think about it, because I just feel like it's something I've been thinking about for a long time, but I still can't quite articulate that article that I want to, you know, the same way where I feel like all the issues in Hampden are too much for me. So I'm just kind of pulling into like little story, a little slice of life, because it's so different for everybody. But it's, yeah, no, there's definitely, I would say Hampden is equated with racism in Baltimore for sure.
Any other questions?
It's not a super cheerful book. Yeah, it's not a super cheerful book. I tried to keep it like, we'll just have it like antique world, and then I'll like bring people in.
Please let me thank our photographer, Teresa Duggan.
Yay!
And our author, China Martens. So again,